Today we're going to ask ourselves the age-old question, is it possible to turn $100 into $1 million with Forex trading? So this video is sponsored by our free Golden Time Bomb Expert Advisor. Take your trading to the next level through automating the London breakout and the opening range breakout. Click the link in the description to download the EA completely for free. So quite a few popular Forex YouTubers have made series on turning $100 into $1 million through Forex trading. And the idea behind that is even if you start with a small amount of money, you can turn it into a large amount of money. So it's an exciting proposition and you should therefore buy their course. The unfortunate thing is that turning $100 to $1 million is mathematically exceptionally unlikely. And in this video, we want to go over the actual calculations to prove with basic statistics why it's very unlikely that this could actually happen in reality, because the probabilities would be so low. It's very improbable that this would be a legitimate thing to do. So first of all, let's show this little table here. This shows a sequence of trades 1 through 14, and we take an initial balance of $100, or I can move the decimals there, but $100. We're assuming growth of 2x, so at every trade we're assuming we're doubling it. As you guys can see, if we go from $100 after one trade, we'd be at $200, and then 400, 800, 1600, 3200, and if you guys remember exponential growth from high school, very quickly we get to a very large amount of money. So technically after 14 different trades executed, we'd be at 1.638 million, and this is very simply just taking each level before it and then doing times 2. So it's a very simple exponential series. We're turning $100 into 1.6 million in 14 trades. So the logic here is that, well, technically, if I can just double my money 14 times, I'm going to be a millionaire from $100. And when you just say that, it doesn't seem particularly difficult to do or particularly unlikely, just because people tend to have gambler's fallacies where they assume that they underestimate the probabilities of doing something. And that's why it's a pretty easy sales pitch to somebody if particularly they haven't worked with probabilities much in the past, because it seems like a relatively feasible thing. Like, oh, I only need to get 14 trades right in a row. That can't be that bad. Or even if I get 8 trades right in a row, I make $25,000. How hard can it be? But in reality, it can be quite challenging. And let's walk through exactly why that's the case. So here, if you guys remember basic probabilities from, I think this would have been in the 8th grade, at least in the Canadian curriculum, you would know that if we have 2 events, so ignore the bottom part, we're going to look at the probabilities of A and B happening. So 2 events, and they're both independently distributed events. So think of it like a coin flip. The probability of flipping coin number 1 being heads would be A, and the probability of flipping coin number 2 being heads would be B. So effectively, the probabilities of something happen, like the probabilities of coin B, are not impacted by whatever happened in coin A. And these are independently distributed events. And this is also a very commonly held belief by gamblers, that they're on a hot streak or they're on a cold streak, which is completely illogical because of the fact that, like if you play roulette, for instance, your results on one spin do not impact your results in the second. That is a truly independently distributed series of events. Trading is not quite like this because there are market regimes and they're not perfectly independently distributed, but for the purposes of this example, let's assume that they are, just to make our lives a bit easier. So as we know, let's say that the probability, or mathematically, the probability of flipping a coin and getting heads is 50%. The probability of flipping another coin and getting heads is 50%. So what is the probability that we flip both coins and they're both heads? We'd simply multiply the probabilities of 1, so 50%, times probabilities of coin 2, which is 50%, and that would give us 25%, not in this exact example, this is just a screenshot of Google Images, but for this example it would be 50% times 50%. So if you want to have the probabilities of A and B and C and D and E, you just multiply the different probabilities together. At least I hope I'm not messing up my statistics from back in the day, but this is essentially what you would typically do. And somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, if they're a statistician in the comments, but I'm rather certain that's the case. So taking that basic math, if we were to have the probability of one trade being right, assuming a 50% win rate, so that's our win rate here, we would then go and probability of trade number 2 being right would be, trade 1 and trade 2 being right, we would simply multiply them by 50% each time, right? So we're taking the prior one here and multiplying it by 50% because each trade is 50% by whatever the series is in above it, right? So like number 1 here is just 50%. This one is going to be 50% times 50%. This one here is going to be 50% times 50% times 50%. And you guys get the gist, right? So we're looking at the cell above because we're just doing a series of 50% times 50% times 50%, so on and so forth. That's what I'm trying to get to here. So what we can see is the odds of having like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 coins in a row, which are all heads, is only 3.13%, because that means that like event 1, event 2, event 3, event 4, event 5, all with the same, effectively, assuming there's only two possibilities, the total odds of all of those being heads in this example would be 3.13%. So that means if we only have a 50% win rate, our odds of getting to 14 trades, which are all heads or all wins, think of heads as wins here and tails as losers, would only be 0.006%. Therefore, the odds of actually having this sequence of heads or wins is exceptionally low. So you could make the argument that, well, Jengas, I'm an amazing trader and my win rate is actually 90%, not 50%. How does that look? Still, even if you have a 90% win rate, your odds of having 14 trades in a row would only be 22.877%. But let me tell you why this is incredibly unlikely to actually have a 90% win rate in this case. Actually, quite frankly, your win rate is probably going to be quite a bit below 50%. It's probably closer to 33%. And let me show you why that's the case. And then here, even having 2 trades in a row, which are correct, only has a 10% probability, or 3 in a row only has a 3.59% probability. So why is that? And that's, if we kind of come over to this side of the spreadsheet, we can see that ultimately, my picture's in the middle of nowhere, but you guys should be able to see it. Okay, let me see. There we go. Perfect. If you have, let's say, a take profit and a stop loss, which is perfectly equal, in a perfectly random scenario, you should hit the top 50% of the time and you should hit the bottom 50% of the time, assuming no spreads, no commissions, etc. This makes sense, right? If you have like price, which is here, and you have a stop loss, which is $20, let's say below, and a take profit, which is $20 above, as you can see, assuming these would be equal, we're going to hit the top 50% of the time, we're going to hit the bottom 50% of the time. This is because if we were to not have a 50-50 relationship, we would have an edge. Because if we were to, let's say, always hit the top 40% of the time, we could just short because we know that we're going to hit the bottom 60% of the time. And in that case, it would not be random because we would have an edge. We would be making money. So in a random scenario, we should converge towards break even, so the expected value should be 0. Therefore, in a perfectly random scenario, we should have a 50-50 win rate. But what always happens, and what people need to realize, is when you move your take profit and stop losses and you start to modify your risk reward, all of a sudden your win rate will converge towards whatever the break-even win rate would be. And this is why scalpers often have super high win rates, but they have inverted risk rewards. This is a very technical video, by the way. So mathematically, let's say we now put our take profit at $20 and our stop loss is at $10. We are going to, on average, hit the stop loss 66% of the time if this was a perfectly random scenario. And the reason why this is the case is simply because that would be the break even. If we lose $1 here, we make $2 here. We only have to hit the top 33% of the time in order to make our break even mark. So if you have a really high risk reward system, that's why if you have a 40%, 45% win rate, where you hit the take profit more than you hit the stop loss in this type of context, you have a really good system because you have a very, very significant edge. So why does this matter? This matters because in this scenario, we are going to be using an insane amount of leverage. And what that means is that most likely, as soon as we start to, let's say even if we have a take profit and a stop loss which are equal, it isn't like the broker will let us go the same distance. Let's say if we hit the take profit, we go $20 up. If we put our stop loss $20 away, most likely you will use up a sizable portion of your margin before you actually get down to hit that 20% stop loss, $20 stop loss. And what that means is that halfway there, the broker is probably going to margin call you. It will obviously depend on the amount of leverage you have, your buying power, etc. So I can't say for sure, but let's just say for all intents and purposes, even if you place your take profit $20 away and your stop loss $20 away, by the time you get halfway to your stop loss, you've probably used up so much of your margin that ultimately you're going to be margin called. And what this means is that in reality, your take profit is probably twice as far away as your stop loss, because that's your real stop loss where your broker will margin call you. Therefore, ultimately, you're trading a 2R risk-reward system. And because you're trading a 2R risk-reward system, your win rate is going to be something close to 33%, because you don't have that much room. If your position starts to go into drawdown, you're going to get margin called. So all of this to show that most likely your win rate will have an incredibly hard time being above 50% if you're trying to use a 2R style of system. So that means, like, even with a really good system, if you're a really good trader, let's say you have a 60% win rate, you still have an incredibly, incredibly low chance of getting to $1 million from $100. It's not mathematically impossible. It is, you have a 0.078% probability of doing so, but it's very challenging. So guys, this is why it's quite hard to turn $100 to $1 million. Perhaps there's the world's greatest traders on YouTube and they're able to do this, but unfortunately I am not that good of a trader. So maybe I should buy some courses. However, effectively, this is why it's so hard to turn $100 to $1 million, because you need to have this run of probabilities in your favor, and on top of that, your win rate, based on the fact that you're going to get margin called, is probably not going to be all that high. So I hope you guys found this video insightful, and I will see you in the next one.